Welcome to the Win, Make, Give podcast. Chad Hyams here, joined by my friend Bob Stewart. Bob, how are you today?
Chad, I'm good.
And we are going to be joined by an amazing guest that you might even hear the laughter in my voice already as we have been talking before we started recording, and it's been entertaining. Now, how do I know this guy is going to bring a heck of a podcast? Because he's done more of them than even we have, Bob.
A lot more.
A lot more of them. And he's going to be bringing us some amazing information. There are 17 different ways we've now decided we could introduce him on the podcast, but we want to welcome to Win, Make, Give your friend and ours, Jordan Harbinger.
Nice. Thanks. You did it. I'm proud of you. I
got it right.
I candidly was expecting you to get it wrong. Because whenever somebody starts early in the show and they go, it's Jordan, let me make sure I get this right. It's Harbinger. I'm like, oh, there's no way he's getting it right. So I think you're in like the 20% that gets it right after getting it wrong twice in a row.
Well, hey, Bob, Jordan, put that on my resume for me.
Jordan, he's going to ask you in a second to like tell us about yourself, but when did you start podcasting? And was it even called podcasting then?
So it was called podcasting, but it was like one of those things. It was podcasting, but it was like NFTs, except nobody knew about it. It was like that niche tech, if that makes any sense. So I started in 2006. And at that time, this sounds so silly and quaint now, but at that time, I was desperately trying to figure out how to upload an MP3 file to the internet and have other people be able to download it, because there was no SoundCloud, there was no YouTube, there was no Dropbox, there was no Google Drive, there was you couldn't just like go pick up some quick and easy file hosting. Like that just didn't exist. There were proto podcast hosts, but they had different plans that didn't make any sense. And like, I was like, no, I just want to put up like 20 hours of audio. And they're like, oh, 20 hours, that's $400 a month. You know, it just didn't make any sense. So I had to call GoDaddy, rent a server rack, like a shared server rack for like $60 a month, and put files up there. And then a friend of mine was like, there's this thing called podcasting, because I was burning CDs. And then when people wanted the files, I would give them the CD and I'd be like, okay, I need this back. And you can imagine how many I got back, like 0. So then I was like, okay, I'm giving you this, but I need a $20 deposit. And then they would be like, okay, if it's $20, then I want 4 of them. And I'm like, no, it's a deposit. I want the damn thing back. And like, they're like, well, no, I'm just going to buy it. And then I realized I'm in law school. I'm going to study I'm getting the bar exam done. I'm going to be like an attorney on Wall Street. Right. And I'm not going to get rich making $20 freaking CDs that take 48 minutes to burn, because that's how fast CD burns.
What do you do? Like go stand outside like a Lions game and like hand your CDs out or something?
I would go to bars and people would be like, oh, hey, what's this thing? And I was teaching a networking course, and people would go, the new people would come in. It eventually turned into a dating course, but new people would come into the course and they'd go, oh, I have all these questions. And I go, all right, I answered all this stuff like last week and the week before. And they would be, because it's disruptive. If someone shows up on day 3 and a new person shows up on day 4, they don't have the background. So I burned all of my, I guess you would call them lectures, but they were very loose lectures done at like, in bars, crowded bars. So I would record them using, I don't even remember now, some sort of like tape recorder type setup, and then or Discman type setup, with a onboard mic, and then not even a Discman. You couldn't write to CDs. It's a mini disc player. That's right, it's a Sony mini disc player to sort of further date the whole thing. And then I would burn them to CDs because nobody had a mini disc player, and I wanted to like get them to listen. And I'd say, you can't ask questions until you've listened to this CD that has like 2 hours of basics on it. And my friend was like, hey, podcasting, brand new thing, been around like a year. And I was like, oh, cool. So everyone had iTunes. I'd look in iTunes. There was no show art. It was just text navigation. So imagine the podcast charts, but only text, right? Yeah. So I'm looking in there and it's like, oh, okay. It was like tech today, this week in tech stuff with 2 dudes. That was the only shows in there. And then there was another show that was like called Sex with Emily, which is still around, with my friend Emily Morse. And I was like, oh, I want to be in there, because everyone's just going into like human behavior and there's 2 shows in there. So this is like a non-crowded category. So we put our show in there, and I thought, now I can tell people where to find it, because everyone at school at Michigan has iTunes. But then I looked at our web hosting and it was like, download from Toronto, download from Germany, download from South Africa, download from New York, download from California. And I was like, all right, we have 800 downloads, and I've told 18 people about this, and they're all in Ann Arbor. Who are these people? You know, and I remember it being really. This is when my mind got like blown about the medium of podcasting, which I'm sure every podcaster, including you guys, has had this sort of experience. But remember, there's not really Facebook. There's no Instagram. There's no Twitter. I don't think at this point.
Right
And
on the
so,
verge of it. 2006.
like right on the edge of that, right?
At
So
the beginning of it. Yeah.
So I said on the show, I said, hey, we're getting a lot of downloads from other countries. If you're not in Ann Arbor, Michigan, who are you and why are you downloading this? Like, I'm so curious. And I got emails from guys who worked in, what is it called? Safari parks in South Africa that were like, oh, I'm downloading it and I listen to my Jeep while I make sure there's no poachers, you know, shooting giraffes or whatever. And like, people would email me from other countries and email me from other states. And they're like, oh, I'm using it to train my sales team. And that's where I was like, whoa, the internet, man. Like I wasn't new to the internet at all, but I thought, I mean, you know, you go to chat rooms or something, you're like, okay, but this was me talking about something I'm interested in, drinking a gin and tonic or whatever with a friend in a basement. And then suddenly hundreds of people, and now of course, hundreds of thousands of people have it across the world. And I just went, radio's dead. This is the beginning of the end. No one's going to want radio. We're all going to have data. Because of course, 2007, the iPhone comes out. My friend has the iPhone. He gets it right away because he's an Apple fiend. And I'm like, this is going to get rid of radio. This is going to be how everyone checks their email. This is going to be like completely radically new thing. And I'm like, once they put podcasts on here, and they will because it's Apple, this is going to blow up. We're at the cutting edge. It felt like YouTube when it was Vidler, or I don't think Vidler became YouTube. I think it was before YouTube. Yeah. But if you remember, like Gary Vaynerchuk, if you know who that is, like Mr. sort of digital, he was like Vidler. You can put videos up, and he did WineLibrary.tv, and him and I knew each other. And he's like, you got to do video, and I'm like, you got to do podcasting, and we were both right. But it turned out like, oh my God, this medium is out of control, unstoppable. It's the next thing. It's
so
like,
I just asked you that question. We just dove right in here. Look, I mean, you get hundreds of thousands of downloads a week, and so a lot of our audience probably is aware of you as maybe is a you know, an active listener of yours, or has come across. Like, I'm not unfortunately not an active listener, but I've definitely come across your stuff here and there. And
how dare you?
I know.
Yeah.
Tell me what, like. Just give me, like, who are you, Jordan? Explain to the audience kind of what your deal is.
So I'm one of the luckiest guys around, I guess you could say. So I started by going to law school, and then I got a job on Wall Street because I needed money because I went to law school and I was in debt after that. That's how they get you. But I never wanted to be a lawyer. And I only went to law school because I thought, oh, getting a job. Nobody ever taught us how to do that. So I walked into like Best Buy and they're like, you're going to make $7.25 an hour selling CDs. And I was like, hold on, guys. I've got a four-year degree from the University of Michigan. I speak fluent German. I can speak Serbo-Croatian. I worked at the U.S. Embassy in Panama, and they were like, cool, CDs, $7.25 an hour. And I was like, okay. But I'm like, you got one last Hail Mary here. I can build computers from parts. Shouldn't I work in the computer department? And they're like, yeah, in 3 years after you sell CDs for $7.25 an hour, we'll bump you up to $10.25. And I just was like, okay, so I'm $68,000 in debt from college, and that's okay if I'm making $7.25 an hour and I spend $1,500 a month. I'll be done paying these loans when I'm 55. No thanks. And that's if I don't get, and meanwhile, no one's telling us how to get better jobs. So I did what a lot of people do, and I go, I'm just going to go to more school, because what could be wrong with the plan of getting way more, another six-figure amount in debt? But to be honest, it's not a bad plan, because law school is a trade, and you can't just go up and go to med school unless you take undergrad prereqs. But any knucklehead can go to law school if you can get in, and there are so many damn law schools that you'll find one that'll let you in. So I got lucky, got into Michigan.
Well, that's not, by the way, not one of the ones that just lets anybody in. Like,
right. No, I that's why I say lucky, because when I looked at Michigan, it was like, you need these scores and these grades. And I went, well, I'm nowhere near that, but I am already at Michigan, and I'm going to apply. And then I'm going to walk into the admissions office and be like, okay, I know I'm not qualified, but like, okay, for real, how do I get in? And I did that. And they were like, well, let's talk about your other qualities. And they were very cool about like not just kicking me out of the admissions office. And they're like, you have a lot of international stuff. Really lean into that in your essays. Really, So I did. And they were like, okay, we kind of have room for like this misfit guy who speaks languages, has gotten kidnapped in Mexico, has like worked at an embassy, has like some other kinds of unique experiences. And I think I just fit sort of like the mold of, okay, you're kind of a weirdo and we need like 5 or 10 in each class to sort of spice things up.
Let me ask you, like that time, Jordan, when you walk into that admissions office, before that, did you realize the value of networking? Or was that like any kind of a moment where, and did you realize in the moment that that's what you were doing and you got in because you went in there and got face to face with those people and talked to them?
No, it's a good question, because what a lot of people do, and I hate when people do this online or anytime, they go, and that was the moment that I knew this. And I'm like, wait. And because if you really get the truth out of them, you realize they just made it up like 30, they're 35 now and they're like, okay, and then they do that backwards thing where their story all makes sense.
Sure.
But no, when you're 21 or 22, you're just like, please don't make me sell CDs for $7.25 an hour at Best Buy, right? Like Tom's little brother works there and he's going to be my mentor. Shoot me, 17. Like that's where I was. So I walked in there and I remember now when I look at it, I go, oh, I accidentally did like a lot of things that were right. Because another thing that I did, so that was a gutsy move, but not an entitled move. I didn't walk in and go, let me wow you. This is why you need to let me in. I walked in and went, hey, so I know that this is really competitive. No one taught us how to deal with stuff like this. And they were like, oh, yeah, you can ask as many questions as you want. And I was like, what are you looking for? It says on the website, but I don't really even know what that means. And I think they just took that frankness as kind of like a willingness to learn. I'm maybe sort of projecting and putting ideas, sort of feelings into their head that didn't exist. But they were so kind and so forthright about what was required that I can't kind of help but think that they appreciated that a little bit. And another thing that I ended up doing right, which was, again, a complete accident, was instead of being like, oh, I don't want anyone to know that I'm clueless in life and that I have no idea what to do, I applied to a bunch of other law schools. And I remember the guidance counselor from Michigan, not Michigan Law, but Michigan undergrad, where I also went. She looked at my scores and I said, yeah, I'm thinking of law school. And she looked at everything and she goes, I'm going to be honest with you. You're shooting way too high. You're never going to get into Michigan. And I know this because, she's a guidance counselor at Michigan. And I go, okay. And she's like, you need to apply to these other schools that are like local. And I went, okay, cool. I wasn't like, no, nobody tells me it's impossible. That's what a life coach says now when they're doing their backward story. But that's like not the case with me, right? And I was like, okay, I believe you. Of course you know what you're talking about. You're a freaking placement counselor at Michigan. And I'm telling you I want to go to Michigan Law and you're telling me it's not possible. You're pretty credible. Luckily, she was totally wrong. And when I told the admissions committee that the such and such guidance counselor said I could never get in, they were like, yeah, it's impossible for her to make that determination. We make that determination. We don't even know if you're going to get in.
Look, there's very few of us have these seminal moments, and I doubt that getting into Michigan Law was the seminal moment for you, but maybe there's a pivot there, some kind of, trajectory change.
Yeah.
Why did you decide to not believe that lady and just forge through to the admissions office?
Yeah,
I think most people would stop there and just been like, okay, well, she said
I just thought like, hey, I don't want to move to like Ohio to go to law school, and I did go to the orientation of Ohio State Law where I got in. And look, there's nothing, I know there's like rivalries. I don't care about football or athletics. And I know Michigan and Ohio have a rivalry. So I'm not trying to talk down to like people who went to Ohio State. It's a fine school. But when I went in there to that law school orientation, I sat down and I heard, Jordan, what's going on, man? And I turned around and there was my buddy from high school, gem of a human, quarterback of our football team, not the smartest guy I went to high school with. I'm just going to like sort of leave it at that. He's not a dumbass or anything, but he was a guy where I went, this is a guy that's not very switched on. There's not a whole lot going on. He's a hard worker. He had that going for him. And I just thought, am I peers with this guy intellectually? And I thought, and this sounds egotistical, but I was like, I think maybe I could do a little bit better, especially with my varied international experiences and things like that. So I went back to Michigan and I was like, hey, please don't make me go to Ohio State. And they laughed. but then of course I was like, no, but for real, like I do this and this and this. And maybe I didn't test that well, but I also didn't really know that I was going to go to law school until recently. Like I just got interested in it. I didn't take prep classes. I didn't take an LSAT, which is like the entrance exam prep course. I couldn't afford to do it. It's thousands of dollars. I just studied a little bit. I took it and I did okay. And they're like, yeah, we don't really need you to have straight A's. Most people who come in do, but it's not a requirement. And then I went, well, then what does this guidance counselor lady think she knows? She's only looking at my record. And they just said that they don't care about all that. They care about other things. So she doesn't really know. And then when they were like, yeah, she doesn't really know, I was like, okay, then I'm looking at a blank slate. I'm not looking at, it's like, you think, you're in this maze, right? And the cheese is somewhere in there and you think you can only go right. And these admissions people were kind of like, no, you can make your own path to the cheese, man. She doesn't know that you can only go left or right. She thinks you can because most people do, but we're looking for people who are not just going to take the same route to get the cheese. And you're that guy. They didn't say it like that, but that's kind of the idea that I got. Because I was like, most people, they go to college, they study for 4 years, they graduate, they apply to law school. I was like, government fellowship to study abroad over here, learn Russian in Ukraine, exchange student in this other place, go to the Middle East, get an internship at an embassy in South America. And they were like, yeah, we don't really care that you got a B- in statistics instead of an A-. We're more interested in, why did this guy go to Panama and spend time working at an embassy? And I was like, oh, I just want to get, I had real answers to the questions they wanted, not just the essay version. When you're writing an entrance essay for a school, I'm just really interested in all that life has to offer. And I believe humans have so much potential and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, I thought it would be really cool to see how we interdict drugs. And so I went to a place where they hated Americans and there was a lot of drugs. And they were like, that's an interesting and real honest answer. So that's what I think got me in. And it was also a Hail Mary, right? Like, I wasn't going, I need to get into Michigan, please let me in. I was like, hey, look, I would love to go to school here. I'm not really married to the idea of going to law school at all, but I would love to go to school here. And that was fine. I think a lot of people, especially young people, think that if they don't have their life path figured out, that they have failed. And I'm here at age 41 to be like, no one's got it figured out already. But adults would have young people think that they've fallen behind because they haven't taken 7,000 AP English and history classes in 9th grade. And there was entirely way too much pressure on and focus on school. And so looking at what real corporate environments wanted and real elite higher learning institutions actually wanted out of their student body was a major kind of eye-opening game changer for me, because it turns out that people who are hiring and people who are recruiting for those elite levels, they had a totally different idea of what was important versus all the crap that we learned was important. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
it does. And Bob, I think I'm going to have a conversation with Ben, because I think you have a new man crush.
No, I'm fascinated by people that, look, your story, it doesn't have this natural path, right? And you've, like, in many, like, look, talk to me about this for a second, because I'm fascinated by the idea that you did a lot of stuff. You guys had this podcast with that was, around dating and then you had like kind of a self-help podcast. Who was your first really big interview that you landed where you thought to yourself, Jesus Christ, like, I can't even believe this person's giving me the time of day?
Did you just say his first interview was with Jesus Christ?
No.
Yeah, that would have been a good one. That's one of those, who could you have dinner with, dead or alive? And I'm like, Jesus Christ. And they're like, no need to swear. This is so dumb, but I'm going to admit it because it's funny. The first guest, one of the first guests we ever had that I thought there's no way we're getting this person, and then they did it, was, do you know who Dog the Bounty Hunter is?
I love that.
Of course.
Yeah.
So we would watch the show, and I was like, I wonder if we could interview, like, Dog the Bounty Hunter. And then it was like, we'd be watching, it'd be like season 17 of Dog the Bounty Hunter coming out now on, Showtime or TLC. So I emailed someone somewhere and they were like, Dog's really interested in this. Yeah, we'll do it. What's a podcast? And I was like, oh, it's like a radio show. And they were like, yeah, whatever. Cool. Nobody's asking to interview Dog, so let's just do it. And he like called us from his, van in Hawaii where he like keeps criminals and like.
It was like, I might have to go because there's a guy, we're staking him out right now.
We're like busting meth dealers and like, beating people up and hitting them with bear spray or whatever. So it was like, there was all that. And I thought, okay, if I can just reach out and email the guy's agent for the people that I see on TV, I can probably get other celebrities or other interesting people on. And it was kind of a funny thing to do, because my plan at first with doing the podcast that later became the Jordan Harbinger show was, I was a student and a lot of books I liked were expensive because they were like $30. And I'm like, where am I going to get $30? I'm already $168,000 in debt. Where I can't, my school books were $800. I'm not going to be able to buy other books. So I would write to these authors and go, hi, I'd like to interview you, but can you send me your book and your DVD course? And they'd be like, yeah, sure. What's your address? And I was like, oh my God, life hack. I'm never paying for any media again. And it was awesome. And then I realized that I was doing them a favor, because I would send it out to 8,000 or whatever our audience was at that time. And I'd get like dozens of, oh yeah, I that interview was so cool. I went out and bought it right away. And I just sort of kept like these clippings. They were emails, but I sort of, printed them out and kept them in a file. And then I would show, because you had to, first of all, no publicist even knew what a podcast was. So I had to sort of like sell the idea that it wasn't a scam or a fake thing. And that was a really good experience because I learned like a business sales skill set. But also I kind of got the idea that, okay, this is the new radio, but these people just don't really know it yet. And I thought in a couple years, it's going to be the new radio. And now like 14 years later, it's finally the new radio. Yeah. In the middle of a freaking pandemic, it's the new radio. But it took way longer than I thought, which turned out to be a blessing as well for other reasons.
All right. So folks, we're 20 minutes in and I never got to ask the question. Bob sort of asked it and then we went off on a side path. Basically who you're hearing here, Jordan's like one of the godfathers of podcasting. I mean, let's just sum it up. I mean, he gets ridiculous numbers of downloads on every episode. He has had some amazing people. But Jordan, the thing amazing stories. I mean, we could just ask you one question, I think, and sit back because you're just a master.
Clearly, I can't shut up. Yes, I'm in the right line of work. I can't stop talking.
It's okay. I work with Bob, so I know how to deal with that.
Right.
Here's the thing. Networking is what made this all happen. If you were to boil it all down, you were in the right place at a right time with a right plan, and but it was your networking that really grew. You believe networking is truly a skill.
Definitely.
It's a skill everybody needs to have because it's helped you grow this world and others grow theirs. Talk to our audience about networking as a skill. Teach us a little bit about networking the way you have, so that we could all become the Jordan of our industries.
Okay, so one of the points that was probably lost in my gobbledygook before when I walked into the admissions office. So one of the things that I learned was I was a shy kid, believe it or not. And I know it's like hard to even believe now, even for me. But I was like, I have to figure out how to go meet people because I'd already started sort of learning the value of networking, but I was like, I can't just like go talk to strangers. That's not me. So I wanted to figure out how to go and talk to strangers. So I went, I'm going to go out every night to bars and restaurants and talk to strangers. And every night I would go out and sit in a corner and hide and nurse a drink and then go home. And I was like, I'm never going to get this right. I need to not be able to hide. And so I dressed up in a kangaroo suit that didn't have a mask. It had like a hood, but no, my face was visible. So I wasn't like just a kangaroo. I was like Jordan in a kangaroo suit. And I went to these fancy restaurants and bars in Ann Arbor. And everyone was like, the staff was like, okay, whatever. That's a regular. He's just crazy. But what happened was I would sit at the bar and people would go, hey man, you're not just going to come in here and sit down in a kangaroo suit and expect people to like let it go, right? So everybody started talking to me. And the later it got through the night, people were a few drinks in, they're just like, who's the jackass in the kangaroo? So everybody knew who I was, but everybody would talk to me. And I'd walk in, I wore that kangaroo suit for like 10 or 15 days because I realized like, if I'm going to have like rock star status from this, I have to talk to people and sort of act the part. And then around 15 days, it started to become a crush. And I thought like, okay, a crutch. And I thought, okay, if I can't do it without the kangaroo suit, then it's not really a skill. So I took the kangaroo suit off and I still talked to everyone. And I was like, this is sort of like the high status mindset that you have to go and run and work a room. And I met so many amazing people that way that gave me like great ideas, that invited me to like charity gala dinners where I'd meet like the chief of surgery for University of Michigan Hospital. And when I wanted to do law school stuff, they were like, oh, you need to just walk into that admissions office. It wasn't my idea to walk into the admissions office. It was this old real estate guy. He's like, just walk in there and tell him why you're qualified. And his wife's like, oh, don't embarrass yourself by going in there abrasive, but go in there and just be confident, like this sort of advice your parents would give you. But I just thought, what do I have to lose? And the guy was right. He goes, you don't have anything to lose. Worst case, they're like, get out of here. We don't take walk-ins. And then
Can I just stop you for that concept? Because a lot of people would just the anxiety of what was going to happen and the embarrassment of getting turned away. Like, we stop because we conjure up all these things in our head. That idea of like, what do you have to lose? I mean, is that like a philosophy of yours now?
Yeah, it was kind of like, the guy said, what happens if it doesn't work? And I was like, oh, it'll be embarrassing. Maybe they will like see my application and go, that's the idiot that walked in here. And he goes, yeah, but you just said they were going to throw it away anyway because your grades. or your scores? And I was like, well, probably. And he goes, so basically that's going to happen anyway. And now you have this maybe chance to do something else that no one else is doing. And you're just not going to do it because it might be awkward for a few moments. And I was like, you got me there, right? And
awkward for a few moments. You dressed up as a kangaroo and went to a bar.
Well, no, I mean the walking into the admissions office.
Yeah,
right?
I know, but if you could dress up as a kangaroo and go to a bar, I mean,
that's kind of where I think that was kind of his point, right? Like, oh, okay, so you can walk in here in a kangaroo suit like an idiot, and you can't go to the admissions office. That's like on your way home from class every day. I don't really buy it. So I had other friends that had already gotten into law school, and they were like, one of them would go, "Don't do it; it's going to be embarrassing," and the other one would go, "You know what? I feel like I've heard of this working before. Another thing you can do is write a letter." So the more input I had, the more I realized that like you can crowdsource ideas, you can crowdsource input. And I remember those guys who had already been admitted, I said, "Can you put in a word for me?" And they were like, "It's not going to do anything, but sure." So they would email the dean and go, "Hey, my friend is a little unorthodox, Jordan Harbinger, but he's got a crazy experience. Just give him a shot. He'd be a good fit at the school based on my personal experience going to school here." And that actually does carry weight, right? When someone says, "Hey, I'm already in here," and this guy would blend right in. This is what we're looking for. They do take that into consideration.
Well, it's one of those things where once they see that, they can't unsee it. They can't be like, "Oh, I don't know anything about this Jordan guy." I mean, at the very least, they've seen somebody else's opinion of you.
And, you show up and they go, "What's your read on that guy?" Well, when he showed up, he was nice. He's not an entitled prick. Great. We have room in the class at, 2023. Let him in. So you'd be surprised, or I would say I was surprised at how much of life seems like just going like that extra inch and a half to get something that you want that most people would never bother doing. And also just pure dumbass luck. Like I was on the wait list initially and I was bugging them and checking in all the time regularly. And then at the end, they were like, "You didn't make it in." And I wrote another letter at the end of that. And I said, okay, well, if I was on the wait list that whole time and didn't make it in, that means I'm qualified for the law school, but there was just somebody else that was more qualified. What if I wait a year and you let me into another class that has tons of room in it already? That way I'm not taking someone who's more qualified spot. And they were like, "We can get behind that logic. All right, you could start a year later." So when I sent that letter, I thought this is a complete waste of time, but I got nothing else to do. So I spent 15 minutes writing and sending that email. That's why I got into that's one of the reasons I got into one of the best law schools in America, was because I went like that extra rep in the gym, that extra little sprint at the end of your marathon. I did that. And most people just go, "I'm not going to bother doing that because it makes me feel less than, or it's extra work I don't feel like doing, or I'm just going to fail anyway. What's the point? Or it's going to be embarrassing." I was just like, I'm the idiot who walked into the bar in a kangaroo suit. Embarrassing doesn't matter. The extra bit of work doesn't matter. I got nothing to lose. Let me just do it and see what happens. And I feel like you said, is it a mantra in my life? Maybe it is, because I feel like there's a lot of stuff I do where I'm just like, if I do this, it's going to be embarrassing. But if it works, I'm a genius.
I think I'm going to retitle this episode "How to Get into Law School." And we're going to give this to every, undergrad that's applying to law school so they can understand. Now, Bob, quiet down over there. Quiet, Bob.
When people do things that other people don't do, that I'm fascinated by that.
Of course you're fascinated, and look what Jordan has turned this into. But I'm going to take you all the way back, Jordan. Okay. All right, back to the question. Other than putting on a kangaroo suit and everybody walking into a bar, and it's the obvious answer of, well, just talk to everybody.
Right.
But you say it's all about networking. Teach our audience right now how they can network better than they already are, or the ones who aren't even doing it, where they can start.
Sure. So a lot of people say, "Oh, I'm pretty good at networking." And what they 99 times out of 100 actually mean is, "Oh, I have friends. I know people in my industry." What they don't necessarily have are systems and skills that are sort of replicable that they can do on a regular basis. So when people go, "Oh, I'm really good at networking. I don't need to learn anything about it." I go, "Okay, what do you do every day for networking?" And they go, "Oh, I mean, I just keep in touch with people." Great. So how do you systemize that? "Well, I don't really need a system. If someone pops into my head, I send them a message." I'm like, that's not terrible, but it's not great. Because now you're only thinking of people when something reminds you of them, and or when you need something from them. But what are you doing to keep in touch with random people that you think I could never get anything from them? You need systems and you need tiny habits. And if you don't have them, you're really not maximizing your ability to do that. Like, it's like those people who I'll use a fitness analogy. Those people, I used to be one of them, who go to the gym and then when you get there, you're like, yeah, I'm going to use the bench. Oh, there's guys on it. I'm going to go do some squats. Oh, okay, I'll do some squats. Oh, cool. There's that fly machine's free now. I'm going to go use that. All right, I'm going to do pull-ups. I'm kind of tired. I'm going to go home now, right? That's not a good workout. It's not a regime. It's not a plan. You're not tracking it. You're not doing anything. Are you working out? Yeah. But are you making progress? Probably not. And so with networking, it's the same thing. Every day I go in the text messaging app on my phone, I scroll all the way to the bottom. And since those apps always sort of structure the interactions by time, the people at the bottom, those threads are like 3, 4, 5 years old. And it's like 2 guys you had lunch with at a real estate conference in 2017 that you never followed up with or kept in touch with. I call this drill connect 4 because I will re-engage 4 of those people every single day, usually just during the week, take weekends off because a lot of people have family time and stuff on the weekend. But I'll send them a message, be like, hey, it's Jordan Harbinger. It's been a while. We met at Real Estate Home Con 2017. We had lunch in our San Diego place, whatever. And I realized I never saved your number or kept in touch with you. What's going on? Here's a picture of my kid. I just moved to San Jose. And like 1 out of 4 or 2 out of 4 won't reply. And then the other 2 will be like, oh my gosh, hey, how are you? Yeah, I moved to Austin, Texas. Here's what I'm doing. And most of the time, nothing really comes out of it right away. But over time, you're re-engaging like 80 or 100 people a month doing this. So over time, you end up re-engaging quite a few people. And then I'll get a text out of nowhere that says like, hey, Jordan, do you do keynote speaking? And I'll go, yeah. And it's somebody I talked to 3 months ago just doing the Connect 4 drill. Great. We have a real estate conference coming up. We need to sort of like get people going. I'm walking into the planning meeting right now. I was going to throw your name in the hat because I enjoyed our conversation back in January. I would never have gotten that speaking gig if it weren't for being top of mind with that person. So now I'm top of mind with 1,000 people a year. I have opportunities that just sort of rains down on me from that. And additionally, a lot of social capital or referral currency comes from, of course, helping other people. And if I have a bunch of people that I'm talking to and one person's like, yeah, I'm just working on my website, I'm doing this. I don't suppose you know a web guy. And I go, actually, I do. So I pull one of my web guy contacts that I talked to 4, 5, 6 months ago, and I introduce those 2. And I can do that because since everyone's sort of top of mind, I have an internal Rolodex of everybody that I can connect. And I also keep it in a CRM called Connection Fox. And so I can type in like web designer. Oh, right, Jeremy. Okay, cool. And I make that intro. So I'm doing that all the time. And people who think they're good networkers, they go, oh, I do that. Yes, but you do it once a quarter. I'm doing it like every day, right? And so my level of referral currency, my level of being able to call in and ask for a favor from 100 or 200 people is through the roof. And most people can't do that. And you find out when you try to do that and they're like, who are you again? So I want to get the, hey, who are you again phase done as soon as possible with every contact that I have. So that's why I'm constantly like re-engaging these weak and dormant network ties. Because if I just call you and go, hey, I've got a book launch, you're just like, new phone, who dis? And then you're like, oh, this guy I talked to 4 years ago? No, thanks. I don't want to sell protein shakes for you or whatever, right? But if I've been talking with them every 6 months, just via text here and there, when I do talk to them and ask them for something, they're not like, oh, you're trying to get me into Scientology right now. Because they just heard from me 3 or 4 times and I didn't ask them for anything. And my agenda was just, hey, I lost track of you because I was bad at it. And, what's going on? Here's my kid. He can talk now. That's the type of thing that builds trust over time and it's scalable. And so I encourage people to do that kind of thing.
Okay, I too use my children to soften up the enemy,
Always.
Bob, you absolutely, and you've got way too many pictures of them that easily could do it. All right, Jordan, not everybody's going to scroll all the way back to the bottom of their text, and not everybody in your world is at the bottom of your text.
Right.
What about those people that are regular people in your world? How are you keeping that network always moving and always breathing so they never even end up at the bottom of your text?
Right. That's a good question. So one of the things that I do is in Connection Fox, which is like the software that I use for this, I will go in every day and it tells me when somebody hasn't been contacted for like 6 months. And so it'll say like, oh, hey, you haven't talked to one of the Jonas brothers or whatever for 6 months. You know, what do you say you send him a text or something like that? And I'll shoot him a text. Well, I don't know the Jonas brothers, but if I did, I would shoot him a text, right, or an email. And then I tell Connection Fox, yeah, I just talked to him, or I sent him a message. It's all good. And so every day I'm doing like 3 of those. And so those aren't necessarily weak or dormant ties. Often I will go, oh yeah, because I go in every day to do 3. But when I'm looking at the list of people that I haven't contacted for a long time, sometimes I go, oh, right, talked to him yesterday. Oh, you know what? I talked to her last week. Actually, I talked to her and her last month, so I'm going to mark them as done. And so I'm sort of keeping this list of people fresh. And the names that pop up are the people that I would never think of. So that's fine, but I'm usually contacting, I'd say the majority of people every 3 months just for a brief check-in. And a lot of people, they freak out and they go, I don't have time to have lunch with 27 people a week. And I'm like, neither do I. I never do that. You know, most people don't say, let's meet up and have lunch. They're busy too.
Well, they say we should meet up one day. Right?
Yeah,
and I'm like, yeah, we should.
And I go, yeah, sure. Are you going to be at, FinCon 2022? If so, I'll see you there. Okay, cool. You know, and if they say no, why don't you come over on Saturday? I'm like, hey man, I am slammed. I would love to, but I'll see you at FinCon. It'll be better that way. You know, you can get away from these sorts of things if people are like, let's have coffee. And it's like, I really can't do that, but I would love to see you at FinCon. Like most people won't have that experience. So a lot of people that are resistant to this, they're like, I can't go out to lunch 5 days a week. And I'm like, I never would do that. And you don't have to. There are very polite ways to tell people that you'd rather just catch up via text. You'd rather see them at a conference. And most people would never ask because they too are busy. So it's a really great way to stay in touch with a lot of people at once and to stay top of mind with a lot of people at once. And it's using connectionfox.com or your texting app in your phone. You don't need like a Salesforce implementation of your own to run through this. And people go, oh, it's complicated. No, it's not. And also it's like, this is like an insurance policy that you could never purchase. You know, if you run into a problem and you need help urgently, you kind of don't have that many options but to sort of beg or pay people to help you. But what happens if your business like falls apart? Now you have to reach out to people and you don't necessarily have the resources to compensate them. So you're relying on their goodwill. So who has more goodwill? The person who hits you up after 4 years out of nowhere and says, oh man, I'm so screwed. I'm going to lose my house. I lost my job. Do you know anyone who's hiring? Or the person you talked to 3 months ago, 6 months ago, that you have good memories of, that's introduced you to your web guy, that introduced you to your landscaper, and then says, hey, I'm screwed. I lost my job. Do you know anyone who's hiring? You're like, you know what? Let me sit down. I'm going to think about this. I feel like I do. Let me make a couple calls and get back to you, because you feel like you owe that guy one, or you at least owe him the courtesy of not just going, no, sorry, good luck, bro. Like you will at least do that. So when I had to restart the Jordan Harbinger show after leaving my old business, I called like 140 people and I said, hey, can you help me? And 139 of them said yes. And they did it without the expectation of anything in return, precisely because I had been quite busy helping them for the past decade without the expectation or attachment to getting anything in return.
Who was the one? Who was the one?
Yeah.
We'll hunt them down for you.
It's funny because it's a popular online influencer that is just a very transactional kind of scummy person. And I was like, no surprise that you're the one who didn't want to help, you know?
Interesting. You said people say that's too complicated. We have this saying around here that people complicate things to justify their inaction. And so like, it's not that complicated.
It's not complicated. No, people, well, you're right. People love to complicate things, right? They go, oh man, I don't want to make a list of everyone I know. That's going to take too long. And I'm like, okay, no one's asking you to do that. I'm asking you to contact people that are already in your phone, for God's sake. You know, like quit making this an impossibly heavy lift. Another exercise that I give people is called layoff lifelines. And it's like, hey, imagine your business crumbles right now or you get laid off tomorrow. Who are the 15 people, 10 or 15, that you would call right now and ask for advice? Write down those names. Then, if you haven't talked to those people in the last like 90 days, reach out now while you don't have an agenda. Because yeah, if your business crumbles and you're calling your guidance counselor, your old boss from 5 years ago, hey, I don't suppose you guys are hiring again. I just got let go. They're going to be way less likely to help you. But if, again, you know, previous example, if you reach out to them now and then in 6 months you get laid off, they're not thinking that you were buttering them up in anticipation of you getting laid off. It's very unlikely. And if you've been talking to them for 2 years, what are you, clairvoyant? You didn't know this was going to happen to you, right? So there's a whole kind of like, you're building trust, you're building rapport, you're keeping people engaged, you're helping them wherever possible. So then when you eventually, if you ever need help, you're not asking them to do a heavy lift. You're just like, hey man, throw me a bone. And people will trip over themselves to help you, especially, I remember when I had to restart the show and I called those 140 people, I would say something like, hey, it's Jordan, I introduced you to, and they'd be like, stop, of course I remember you. Yeah, I'm still working with John. We partnered up and we do web business together. What's going on, man? What can I do for you? And I'm like, well, I've got to restart. Can you publicize the Jordan Harbinger show? And they'd go, yeah, I'm going to email it to our whole list. Least I can do. And I'm like, okay, cool. Because that's probably like a $20,000, mail out that if you bought it. And he's like, no, I owe you one. You introduced me to my business partner, stuff like that. So you really can't buy insurance for that.
Chad does all this work to set up the questions and dig into who you are. And he's got this whole thing. I don't think, Chad, we've even let you get to one of these. You had the quote, dig the well before you're thirsty, which is essentially what you just described. Right?
Yeah. Yes, exactly. That's a great motto. I didn't make it up. I think it's like a Harvey McKay book title from like 1997 or something like that. But that is exactly what it is. Dig the well before you get thirsty, because most people only think to dig a well once they're like, oh God, I'll never forget. Somebody was launching a book and I go, when's your launch? And he goes, probably October next year. And I go, okay, you better get started now. And he goes, yeah, I was thinking of an email campaign somewhere around July. And I was like, but July of this year, right? Not next year. And he's like, no. Like if you wait till July next year, you're going to be very disappointed when you email 50,000 people and 49,999 hit delete. Like you are going, you're going to be pretty upset. You got to start now. You got to dig the well before you get thirsty. You got to ask for things, or you got to dig create the rapport and create the connection before you need it. And it's so simple, and you'd think everyone knows this, but yet nobody has systems for it. It's like, if I get a cold call from somebody I haven't talked to in 10 years, I just assume they're trying to get me into a multi-level marketing scheme, period, right? Period. Or shady financial investment vehicle,
right.
But
this new cryptocurrency.
Yeah, they're trying to sell me some new Bitcoin knockoff thing. But so you have to make sure that you are not coming across that way. And a lot of us are kind of blind to that because they think, well, I'm not that guy. Well, okay, but nobody knows that because you don't have the rapport that you think you do with with most of the people you know.
You're being warned because you're going to hear from us regularly now, so that we're making that digging every day, so that when we're ready, you're ready to have us on your podcast.
That's right.
The other way around.
Yeah. All right. I assumed that would come back to bite me in the ass at some point.
There you go. We actually listen to what you're saying and we do it. All right. So last question I want to put out there to you before we kind of get near the end and wrap this up. Bob asked about one of those interviews, and you said reaching out to Dog was just kind of like,
that was the first one, right? The first
right.
one.
How's this ever going to happen? But of all the interviews you've had, what's the one that stands out in your head that you're like, oh, wow, when I got the opportunity to talk to such and such and they said blank, it's just stuck with me still today?
So I need to pick one of these because people ask me this kind of thing a lot and they're like, it must have been Kobe Bryant, right? And I'm like, yeah, because is it that? I'm not even sure, and I feel like I've learned so much from a lot of people that I can't even necessarily pinpoint one concrete takeaway. I would say guys like Ray Dalio teach you that the more you know, the more your brain just sort of processes information at an almost subconscious level. But looking at some of the really amazing personalities we've had on, like Kobe Bryant or like Danny Trejo, you realize different things from different folks. Danny Trejo sticks with me because he is kind of, by all accounts, he's world famous, right? Everybody recognizes him, even if they don't know his name. He's like the Mexican villain in every single movie. And when you say that, they go, oh, that guy, right? With the scars on his face. So, but he's known as the kindest guy in the business by pretty much everyone that I spoke to. I was like, oh, I got Danny Trejo coming on. And they're like, oh, nicest guy ever. And I'm thinking, and then I started researching him and I thought, how strange for this nice guy to have chosen a film niche where he looks like a bad guy. And then I was doing my research on him and he's like, yeah, when I was 12, I was robbing people with shotguns for heroin. And I was like, oh, dang, you were a bad guy. Yeah. And then he's like, yeah, these tats that look like they're prison tats, they're prison tats. Like, these are real prison tats. I'm like, Oh, because meanwhile, I was just thinking like, look at this guy probably working as a bartender somewhere and was like, I got to look more badass. Let me get all these tats. Let me like, no, he just was a bad dude, and then he decided to become a nice person and he worked on it. And he is that guy now. And he's like super generous. You're like, oh, I'm going to be in LA. How are you? And he's like, come to my taco shop. I want to buy you dinner, and you're like, okay, but I'm just a normal dude and you're Danny Trejo. And he's like, cool, come over. And you hear these stories about him that are, do you think if you don't have time to be kind, you don't have the money? This is a guy who's known for driving around his neighborhood in a classic car, seeing a woman with a baby and then stopping, going into his trunk, pulling out a bunch of diapers and going, hey, do you need diapers? And they're like, yeah, my husband lost his job during the pandemic. And he's like, cool, where do you live? I'll drop him off. And then he'll like drop diapers and food off at a stranger's house because he's Danny Trejo and they trust him with the address. Like, he's not going to rob me. He's Danny Trejo, for God's sake. He's dropping off diapers. So this is a guy who just like decides to sort of superhero around, East LA because he likes it. Meanwhile, when he was the age of some of the kids he sees in his own neighborhood, he was robbing people with shotguns so he could buy heroin. Like, this is a dramatic life. So if you ever think like, oh, I don't know if I can change, or I don't know if I have the ability to be like, just remember there's a guy who spent time in prison because he was robbing people with shotguns for heroin, now dropping off diapers and food for, pregnant and women, single mothers and people who don't have a job somewhere in East LA. And they're freaking famous and could be just doing a movie instead. Like, this is a real legit guy who is just embraced kindness as a value and lives it and doesn't just talk about it, in the news.
All right. So folks, if you're looking for another podcast to listen to, go check out Jordan's, right? And it's just your name, right? It's the Jordan Harbinger show.
That's right.
And scroll back and find this interview with Danny in there. And there's some other fantastic ones. You're talking about good deeds. You're talking about doing good. We like to do that here. We're win, make, give. So the give part in season 2 is, Jordan, on behalf of Win, Make, Give, we're making donations to charities based on the number of listens this episode gets in the first 30 days. So we could be in a lot of trouble when you share it with your whole audience and all of a sudden we get that many listens.
Yeah.
But on your behalf, who's the charity that we're going to be able to make a donation to based on the number of listens this episode gets?
Okay, so this is fun. First of all, how does it work? Is it capped? Because I'm going to bankrupt you guys. But also, the charity is going to be Children International. Are you familiar with it at all? You know it?
I am not.
Okay, so it is basically you quote unquote adopt a kid in like Sri Lanka or Guatemala, and you pay $30, whatever. It's like $35 a month. They get dental care, school, shoes, some clothing, and I think they get access to a resource center where they have like a doctor, or they can take a shower because a lot of these people live literally in the jungle. Like, I remember adopting one of the girls from Guatemala there, and she's like, I don't get to go to school or wear shoes, so thank you. And I was like, I'm sorry, what? And she's drawing crayon letters for me and stuff. And I looked up the situation she lived in, and I was like, what does it mean? I'm calling them up. Like, what does it mean when it says open pit for sanitation facilities? And that means she walks into a field and goes to the bathroom somewhere in the field. And I was like, okay, what? There are children that live like this. Like, I didn't really even realize that there are people that literally just like go to the bathroom wherever they can because there's not even a freaking latrine. So I love that because kids are born into that every day. And I'm thinking, God, you have no upward mobility whatsoever if you can't even get a toothache fixed or pee in a toilet. How are you going to how are you going to get a job? So that's a charity that's worth it for me. Because for a dollar a day, this person's the whole life is totally different. And that's a good investment.
Well, it's an investment we are happy to make on your behalf for the listens that you're going to bankrupt us on now. As that many people listen to this episode. And I know Ben is excited about the challenge of seeing how many episode listens we get on this one. Jordan, how can people connect with you after this? They've heard this. They're like, that guy was awesome. He talked even faster than Chad and Bob. We want more Jordan. Where do we get him?
Go to the Jordan Harbinger Show. You listen to podcasts. That's my podcast, Harbinger. I'm also at Jordan Harbinger on Twitter or Instagram, and I answer all my DMs and messages. I try to Danny Trejo it up online there and get in touch with people. But I just want people to check out the podcast. Learn from some of the amazing people that I've scammed into talking to me for an hour, on my podcast and gotten them to open up about their amazing lives. That's what I'd love to hear. Is from your audience checking that out.
We would love to hear from each and every one of you in our Facebook group, facebook.com/group/win-make-give. Come on in there. Let us know whose interview it was that you listened to on Jordan's podcast. We want you to go check it out, listen to this, then jump into our Facebook group and say, hey, I listened to his interview with blank, so that we know, one, we're making a donation, and two, we want to know which interviews you think are the best that he's done. So check those out and continue listening to all of ours. Until our next episode, Jordan, on behalf of Bob, myself, Ben, the Win Make Give team, we want to thank you, and everybody out there, remember, do good,